It's been 1 year since the release of the XH2S. Fujifilm has historically been a photography-centric system, so what do I make of it from a cinematography perspective? The first thing you'll notice when you pick up this camera is the weight. Coming from the X-T3, the camera is heavier with a bigger grip and worse build quality. The XH2S feels cheaper than the X-T3. Specifically, the chassis feels less metallic. Perhaps it is a plastic or carbon composite. There's a lot of technology inside the XH2S, so it could be argued that it's more plastically to decrease the weight, but that wouldn't explain the cheaper quality of rubber gripping on the camera. The grip on the XH2S is superior to the X-T3, especially for extended use with larger lenses. This was previously limiting, as I would reluctantly use larger lenses on the X-T3 for fear of dropping the camera. I personally find the new buttons and PASM dial to be an improvement to the superficial retro dials as a video user. It's more intuitive to switch between modes and massive settings with just a switch. There are some changes like the focus switch and removal of push-click on the back command dial for zooming, but these don't bother me. There are more buttons to map on the XH2S. You don't want to use that button to zoom anyway, because you can accidentally change shutter speed, and pressing that button will cause considerable shake when shooting video. I map zoom to the red record button on top. The flip screen is the same as the X-T4, which is massively useful for video. I never found the need for the XH2S flip screen to flip closed and hide the screen, but I always found myself wanting to tilt up without flipping out, which the XH2S can't. This frustration is amplified by the fact that the eyepiece sensor is too sensitive, and the screen often blacked out when I was just filming close to my chest. I don't want to be constantly changing eye sensor settings, so this is a big gripe for me. The only reason you should get this camera over the other models is because of F-Log 2 and stack sensor. F-Log 2 is incredible and allows for 14 stops of dynamic range. I found photos to also have more dynamic range than the X-T3 despite having similar image quality. However, the drawback is there's more noise. Luckily, the noise is mostly luma noise and looks like grain. Unfortunately, when uploading to YouTube, it looks terribly pixelated. F-Log 2 is beautiful, but DaVinci Resolve doesn't support F-Log 2 even after 365 days since release, while Leica already had DaVinci support from the start. Also, the F-Log 2 native ISOs of 1250 and 3200 are not a good range. It's easy to clip highlights at 1250, so you're only limited to shooting at sunset and later. If you want to shoot any other time, then F-Log 2 requires an ND filter. OpenGate is incredibly fun and a great tool for anamorphic shooting, but the camera doesn't provide anamorphic support. ProRes is great, but leads to large file sizes and requires constant storage transfer with your CF Express B card. IBIS is better than no IBIS and works pretty steadily when standing still, though I think it looks worse than IBIS off when you're walking. So I map the IBIS button to the front of the camera so I can quickly turn off IBIS whenever I'm moving. The autofocus is improved for photos and is great for burst shooting and animal object tracking, though I found tracking to be poor for video, with even the X-T3 performing better on occasion. There are some other neat features like F-Log Assist, but no false color or waveforms to be a true cinema camera. Also, changing white balance is terrifying, and you can't change a lot of settings once you start recording. The image quality is quite similar to the X-T3. In photography, I found there to be a little more dynamic range, though more noise and muddier details, so it's a wash for me. For video, there's a lot more dynamic range and noise, but nothing DaVinci Resolve noise reduction can't manage. The image feels a bit softer on the XH2S and has better roll-off, but is still a bit too sharp even at -4. The image quality was already amazing on the XT3, and F-Log 2 really pushes the image more than you'd expect. Color is also improved, and the roll-off makes it less digital. Dynamic range is really a big deal. However, the noise on F-Log 2 really is a concern, causing pixely splotches on YouTube, so noise reduction is a must. I typically use it on all clips. Although I prefer the color science compared to other cameras like Sony, I think the XH2S has less of the standard cinema look. It's not so much digital as it feels a little bit flat, lacking pop and dimension. This is of course very subjective and dependent on how much contrast you add, but relatively, I find my videos to render people less organically. I make this opinion with regards to chasing the Arri look, so for professional corporate work or interviews, this camera will still look fantastic. That doesn't mean I don't like the image. It's just more of the mirrorless look than a cinema one. Once you can identify the difference, it's hard to ignore. But for the normal person, the image will be more than good enough. It pains me to say it as a fan of Fujifilm, but for every feature given, they didn't implement it well. I feel like this could have been an amazing camera if they just focused more on the video side. It feels like the XH2S is a side grade, and definitely not for the average consumer when cameras like the XS20 exist. You should only get this camera if you plan on heavily using the video features. This doesn't mean it's a bad camera, it's just similar to an already amazing XT4. But the fact that the XH2S costs $2,500, the same price as the Blackmagic, which is better than the Fujifilm for video, makes it arguably poor value. Combined with many lacking key features, makes this a great camera but a disappointing product. Video, which is the only reason you should buy the XH2S, makes it so I cannot recommend this camera as an upgrade if you already have a Fujifilm camera. If it was the same price as the XT3, then of course I'd recommend it, but as of this date, I'd only recommend this camera if you're switching to Fujifilm and need a hybrid camera, because photos and film simulations are awesome, particularly nostalgic and classic negative. Don't get me wrong, it's a great camera in isolation. I just take buyer's remorse seriously, which is why I cautiously recommend purchases. So do I personally regret upgrading? Not exactly. I needed a flip screen, IBIS, and F-Log 2 for my YouTube channel, and I really enjoy nostalgic negative. This review may seem negative, but that's because I'm a critical person in general. I wouldn't be such a villain if this camera didn't cost $2,500. The reason you'd get this camera over Blackmagic is if you wanted the option to vlog, have a smaller setup, while also having the option to take photos. But camera bodies are so good nowadays, and upgrades are so slight and frequent. It's better to invest your money in lenses, audio, or lighting, because those will last longer, while cameras cycle regularly. So if you're considering upgrading, I'd skip this one and wait for a cheaper copy. Spend wisely.